The prairie carried a silence so deep that even the wind held its breath, as though afraid to stir the bones of something buried long ago. Beneath a sun bleeding red into the rim of the desert, a lone rider moved forward. His shadow stretched longer than the trail behind him. His name was Wade Corbett. Some men rode with songs to ease the miles. Wade rode with dust in his throat and debts pressing against his ribs like cold iron. Around Perdition Flats, stories hung heavier than smoke. Some were carved into warped signposts, others whispered across firelight, but none were feared more than the ancient law. No man was to drink from the Deadman Spring once the raven circled overhead. No man was to cross the chalk ring the evening wind laid in dust. The first rule kept a body alive. The second guarded the soul. Wade knew those warnings. He had just never been the sort to bow to shadows. He'd crossed barren mesas, outweighted sheriffs who mistook him for another man, and bedded down with coyotes close enough to hear their teeth snap in the dark. To Wade, superstition was for men still naive enough to believe the world cared about their prayers. But thirst was no respecter of law. By the time he drew rein, his canteen had been dry since morning. Each breath cracked his lips, and there it was, the spring, shimmering faint as a coin dropped deep into the earth's pocket. A raven tilted its wings in the dying light, circling slow, like a clock marking its final minute. Dust gathered into a thin white band about the water, fragile, unbroken, as if the land itself had spoken a promise. Wade swung down. His boots sank into the thirsty ground. The horse shivered, neck stretched toward the water. "Easy," Wade muttered, though his own throat burned hotter than July leather. He stepped forward. From the shadows came a voice, cool and steady. "You ride heavy for a man who claims he's only passing through." Wade turned. A woman stood by a cairn of stones, coat cinched against the wind, boots powdered white. Her hand rested near her hip, not on iron, but in the quiet way of someone who had judged more men than she had trusted. Her eyes caught the last light with a flint-like spark. "I claim no such thing," Wade said. "Then you're here to test it." "Test what?" "The law. You know it. Or maybe you only read the signs that suit you." She nodded toward a weathered plank, its knife-carved words nearly erased by years. Wade didn't read them. He had heard enough. The raven screamed once, cutting the sunset in two. "My horse is near spent," Wade said. "I'm not looking to die of thirst within sight of salvation." The woman's answer was cold as wire. "Dying is easy. The trouble comes with what you pay first." Wade crouched, dipped his hand. Cool water touched his skin, sharp as betrayal. He raised it and drank. The raven vanished into the dark. The chalk ring closed like a noose, and in that moment, Wade Corbett was no longer just a rider chasing miles. He was a man marked, not by his past, but by the price waiting in the shadows of the law he had broken. The light turned strange at the edge of evening, that thin blue hour when a man's choices start to show their seams. Wade stood with water still clinging to his knuckles, while his horse drank deep at the spring. Behind him, the chalk ring lay like a boundary he could not uncross. The woman watched with the patience of a clock. "You'd best step back," she said, "if you plan on keeping anything you brought into this night." Wade let the water slide from his palm. "What exactly did I steal besides a drink?" "You took time," she replied. "And time is what keeps this country from chewing men down to their names and spitting the letters into the wind. The ancient law was written to put time back where it belongs." His eyes narrowed. "You a lawman?" "I'm what the ground has when there's no courthouse," she said. "Mara Lark. I keep the law that keeps the town." She nodded toward the chalk. "Step back and hear your debt. Leave your boots where they are, and your name will follow you into every mouth that whispers past sundown." Wade glanced at his horse, then at the horizon where the sun bled thin as a thread. The raven's shadow no longer crossed the water. Night was taking that duty now. With a breath deep as a diver's, he stepped back across the chalk. "What do I owe?" "One night," Mara said, "at Widow's Mill." Sundown to sunrise. Alone. No lamp burning past its first wick. No singing. No speaking your full name. And if you hear the creak when there is no creak, you do not answer. Sounds like superstition dressed in Sunday black, Wade muttered, though the words didn't quite steady his bones. Call it what you like. I call it balance. You drank after the raven. You crossed the circle. Balance must be kept, Mr. Corbett. Wade stiffened. I didn't tell you my name. You ride with silence, Mara said. Silence carries a trail like any wagon. From beneath the red cloth tied to the cairn, she lifted a small tin star, dulled with age. The town is 6 miles. We'll ride half before night, claims the rest. I'll show you the door and leave you to your watch. And if I refuse, then you'll learn how quick a man becomes just another story mothers tell to keep their children close. She turned toward the buttes. Ride. They trotted side by side along a dry creek bed. Salt gave way to scrub to gravel pricked with yucca and thorn. A coyote slipped across their path and melted into shadow, as though the land itself carried warnings. Widow's Mill, Wade said after a while. Why that name? The mill married a river, Mara answered. The river left when the silver men cut a new channel. Wind took over the work of turning the veins. Wind carries a meaner temper than water. You speak like you've kept watch there yourself. Her mouth tightened. I've kept watch where I had to. The mill keeps its own count. They crested a rise. Ahead stood a black shape against the last peal of light, a wooden tower with broken vanes, leaning but unfallen, like a man who knew the weight of his own bones. The grey ribs of corrals lay scattered around it. To the right, a dry gully cut the earth like an old scar. Mara slowed. You'll stable your horse under the lean-to. Once you cross the threshold, no talking. If someone speaks your given name through the door, you keep it shut. And if the door opens on its own, Wade asked, then you'll learn how to hold it closed. They dismounted. The air carried a chill heavier than the hour promised, the kind of cold that comes from a place remembering. Wade tied his horse. The animal tossed its head, then settled with a weary exhale. Mara stood by the door. There's another chalk ring inside. Once you step over it, you don't step out till morning. Not for thirst, not for voices, not for anything that sounds harmless. And if I last the night, Wade asked, then you pay what you owe and walk out lighter than you came in. And if I don't? She lifted her gaze to the first star. Then a cowboy hat falls into the dust, and Perdition Flats remembers your name for reasons you wouldn't prefer. Wade gave the faintest smile. You do like your warnings. I like my town quiet, and the mill is louder than most trouble when it isn't respected. She pushed the door. Hinges sighed like something weary of secrets. Inside waited a room with a loft, a narrow ladder, a table, and a window staring at the gully. The floorboards were scarred by boot heels and drag marks. Across the planks ran a chalk ring, thin as bone and stubborn as truth. Wade paused. You gonna bless me, Mara-lark? Blessings are for mornings. This is evening work. She drew out a tin cup and handed it to him. If your throat turns to rope, put a mouthful in this and set it on the sill. Wait. Don't ask for more. Don't look away while you drink. What'll I be drinking? Balance. Or regret? She stepped back into the bluing air. When morning colors those veins, not before, you walk out. I'll be watching from the ridge. If you come out early, I'll turn my horse away. That too is the law, meaning if I fail alone. Most men do. Her boots whispered over gravel as she walked away without looking back. Wade crossed the threshold, closed the door, and felt the hinge sigh. The air smelled of old grain and older decisions. He set his hat firmer on his head, then stepped over the chalk line, boots cautious for the first time in years. He sat on a one-legged chair angled against the wall and listened. Desert quiet has its shapes if you let your ears touch it. The veins groaned once, then held. Somewhere in the dark, a small creature rustled, then thought better of it. Wade let his breath settle. Time passed the way it does when a clock isn't wound uneven, slippery, minutes hollowed out. The gully waited beyond the window like a sleeping thing, and Wade Corbett, for the first time in years, wondered if silence was about to learn his name. The hours between midnight and dawn stretched longer than a cattle trail. Wade sat rigid inside the mill, hat brim casting his eyes in shadow, revolver resting but ready on his thigh. The chalk ring glowed faintly in the dark, pale as old bone. The night had grown so still that even the coyotes kept their throats closed. Then it came the sound of water, trickling where no creek had run in years. A whisper curled beneath the door, winding through the cracks, stroking Wade's ears with the promise of cool relief. He clenched his jaw. If you hear the creak when there is no creek, do not answer it. Mara's warning clamped around him like iron. The horse outside snorted, hooves rattling against the lean-to. Then silence unnatural, immediate, like a candle snuffed in a room without windows. Wade pressed one palm against the door. The timber was cold, colder than desert nights had any right to be. Wade Corbett. The voice was a woman's, soft, trembling with longing that cut past his guard. His pulse stumbled. Few had spoken his full name in years, fewer still with such gentleness. He stepped back from the door, fists curling tight. He turned toward the window. The gully shimmered faint, as though starlight had spilled where it shouldn't. A bent silhouette flickered at its edge, hands reaching for something unseen. Wade dragged his eyes back to the chalk, refusing to give shape to what shadows wanted to be. The circle itself wavered, dust shifting as if eager to erase itself. Wade's breath grew sharp, shallow. He reached for the tin cup on the sill. Empty. His tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, dry as sand, but he dared not ask for more. The voice came again, closer now, almost pleading. "Wade, please." He closed his eyes and whispered not his name, not an answer, but words meant to anchor him. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The whisper broke. Silence slammed back down, heavy as a coffin lid. Wade climbed the ladder to the loft, each rung groaning like it had secrets of its own. From above, the room spread small and mean, the chalk ring deliberate in its defiance. A rope lay coiled in the corner, cut clean, its ends frayed as though someone had used it for a purpose the mill still remembered. Dust sifted down from the rafters. Outside, the vanes groaned once, though no wind touched them. Shadows slid across the floor like men too proud to admit fear. Wade shut his eyes, breathing steady, and thought of Mara's words, balance or regret. The night thickened, and Wade Corbett began to understand why they called the law ancient, not for its age, but for its teeth. The dark before dawn is when a man's resolve thins, when silence sharpens its teeth. Wade stayed in the loft, back against a beam, revolver cold across his lap. His heartbeat kept uneven time, out of step with the groan of the rafters. The chalk circle below seemed weaker now, its pale line breathing in and out like a tired lung. Wade fixed his eyes on it, as if the act of watching alone could keep it whole. Then came the creak low, deliberate. Not the wind, not the vanes, something heavy pressing the floorboards just beyond the chalk. The sound of weight a man would make if he stepped down without care. Wade Corbett. The voice was closer this time, warm and coaxing. A silhouette flickered near the door, stooped shoulders, wide hat brim, the shape of someone Wade once knew but refused to name. His breath caught. "No," he muttered. Fists clenched. The figure wavered, dissolved like smoke unraveling through rafters. The silence it left behind was heavier than its presence. Wade forced his attention toward the sill. The tin cup rattled faintly, as if a finger unseen had tapped it. A single drop appeared inside, trembling in the dark. His throat screamed for it. His hands ached to reach, but Mara's warning still echoed. One mouthful, no more. He gritted his teeth and left the cup untouched. His body burned with thirst, but surrender would weigh more than his life. Shadows slithered along the walls, stretching like men standing shoulder to shoulder. They leaned in, silent, watching. The mill smelled suddenly of rope and smoke, the kind of scent left after a hanging. Wade whispered, not to them, not to himself, but to the silence that threatened to swallow him whole. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The words steadied his breath. The shadows quivered, then pulled back into corners. Time crept on, cruel and uneven. Each heartbeat cost him more. The gully outside stayed black, its shape swelling against the window like something waiting for permission to come closer. Wade knew the mill wasn't done. Not yet. And dawn was still a long ride away. The night pressed heavier, every minute stretched thin. Wade sat on the loft's edge, muscles stiff from stillness, eyes burning from the weight of the dark. The chalk line below looked frail, as though the dust itself wanted to scatter. A sound broke the hush, the door hinge groaning, slow as if a careful hand were pushing. Wade froze. The latch had not moved. Yet the wood moaned like something testing its strength. Wade. The voice slid through the cracks, softer now, almost tender. You don't have to be alone. His fists tightened. Not mine to answer, he whispered, though the words quivered in his chest. The air chilled sharp. His breath drifted pale. In the far corner, shadows thickened, knitting themselves into the outline of a woman. Long hair fell across her shoulders, her arms reaching out. The figure did not step across the chalk, but it leaned close, its face half-formed, its mouth bent in sorrow. The horse outside screamed again, no whinny, but a ragged scream that clawed through the rafters. Then silence, abrupt and cruel. Wade's stomach knotted. He wanted to rise, to see if the animal yet lived, but the circle anchored him. The vanes overhead turned once, twice, though no wind stirred. The echo rattled the boards, a hollow hymn that made his bones ache. Wade climbed down, slow, boots brushing the chalk's edge. The figure faded. Only the cup on the sill remained, trembling faintly. A bead of water formed inside, unbidden. His throat begged. His hand shook as he lifted it. Just one mouthful, cold, sharp, tasting of memory. In it flickered a fire he'd once shared, the shadow of a woman's laugh, the echo of a promise he had never kept. Then it was gone, leaving his chest emptier than before. He set the cup back, jaw tight, forcing the thirst deeper down. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The whisper died. The mill grew still. Wade climbed the loft again, back against the beam, revolver across his lap. He kept his eyes open, refusing the dark its invitation. The night was far from spent, and Widow's Mill had yet to reveal the sharpest tooth of its debt. The desert night knew patience, but patience can cut sharper than any knife. Wade leaned against the loft beam, fighting the drag of his eyelids. He dared not sleep. Dreams in this place would not belong to him. Below, the chalk ring pulsed faintly, thinner than before, as though the dust was growing weary of standing guard. Wade's gaze never left it. Then came a sound that had weight footsteps outside. Heavy, deliberate, circling the mill. Gravel crunched, paused, then dragged, as if boots too tired to carry their man straight. The horse gave no answer. Not a snort, not a stamp. Too quiet. Wade's chest clenched. The steps stopped at the door. 3 knocks followed, slow, measured, each one landing like a judge's gavel. Wade Corbett. Time to settle. The voice was rough, low, carrying a sneer Wade hadn't heard in years. It belonged to a man long buried under a western sky. A partner he had left behind. A debt he'd never spoken of. The door moaned as though it were being leaned upon. Dust shivered from the frame. The chalk line wavered under the draught, fragile as breath. You always were a thief of time, the voice said, taking more than your share. Wade's jaw clenched, his lips parted, but he forced the words back. To answer was to invite was to owe. The knocks ceased. Silence fell hard. Then, like a weight lifted, the footsteps dragged away, fading until even the night doubted they'd ever been. Wade exhaled through his teeth, long and ragged. His hand brushed the revolver at his side, not for use, but for steadiness. He glanced at the tin cup. Empty. No mercy tonight, only endurance. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The words steadied his breath. Shadows shifted in the rafters, forming shapes he refused to name. Each creak felt like breath, each sigh of wind like fingers at his collar, but Wade held still, stubborn as the chalk ring. Then he saw it, the faintest bruise of grey along the horizon, morning's first whisper, still distant, fragile as smoke, but there, and Wade Corbett knew he had lived through half the night. Yet the widow's mill had not bared its full hunger. The horizon's grey deepened, but morning dragged its feet. Wade fixed his stare on that faint light, telling himself it meant survival. Yet the widow's mill was not about to let him go cheaply. The rafters shuddered above, dust sifting down in lazy threads. The air thickened, carrying a scent Wade knew too well, iron and smoke, the smell left behind when a rope has done its work. Then laughter rose from beneath the floorboards. Thin at first, then sharper, splintering the silence. Wade's stomach tightened. The laugh circled the chalk ring, scratching at the boards like a rattler hunting a gap. Debt. Wade Corbett. The voice hissed between laughs. You thought water was free? The spring remembers. The circle does not forgive. He spat into the dust. I paid. I'm still here. The floor sagged as though boots too heavy pressed down. For a moment, he swore he saw tracks forming inside the chalk, deep, wide prints that did not belong to him. Then, as quickly as they came, they vanished. The horse outside screamed again, short, ragged, then cut off. Wade's jaw locked. He wanted to run to the door to know if the animal still lived. But the circle held him fast. Through the window the gully shimmered. Figures gathered at its edge, grey silhouettes standing shoulder to shoulder, hats low, faces blurred. They moved like marionettes tugged by unseen strings. One by one they raised their arms, pointing toward the mill. The vanes above turned with a groan, though no wind stirred. The rafters rattled like bones in a gambler's cup. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The words left Wade's lips like a charm he had no business believing in, yet speaking them steadied his hands. The figures at the gully began to unravel, thinning into smoke as the grey of dawn spread. But Wade knew it was no mercy. The night was simply drawing breath for its final push. The eastern sky bled with the faintest trace of rose. Morning was near, but the widow's mill had claws yet, and it meant to use them before light stripped its teeth. The rose tint at the horizon promised dawn, yet inside the mill the dark deepened, jealous of its coming rival. Wade shifted in the loft, shoulders aching, eyes raw. He had outlasted whispers, laughter, and ghosts of men long gone, but the mill saved its cruelest tricks for last. A sound began beneath the quiet, drip, drip, steady as a clock. Wade's head turned. The noise came from within the chalk circle. At first, he thought it was water. Then he saw it dark stains spreading across the boards, thick and glistening. Not water. Something heavier, something that carried the memory of iron. A cowboy hat rolled across the floor, circling once before falling flat. Wade's breath snagged. The hat was his size, his shape, but older, rim-torn, sweat-stained as if it had lived years he hadn't yet seen. The drip continued, pooling at its side. "Every man pays," a voice said. It came from everywhere and nowhere, woven into the beams, the floor, the rope still coiled in the loft. Some with years, some with blood. "What will you pay, Wade Corbett?" He gripped the revolver, though the steel felt like a child's toy in his hand. "Not like this," he muttered. The shadows pressed closer, filling corners, bending along the chalk as if testing its edge. The circle flared faint, resisting, but each flicker seemed weaker than the last. Wade rose, slow, his boots whispering against the boards. He wanted to shout, to break the silence that gnawed at him, but Mara's warning hammered in his skull. "Do not speak your full name." The stains retreated suddenly, vanishing between cracks. The hat dissolved into dust. Only the creak of the veins remained, long and grudging. He let out a breath and whispered the words that had kept him tethered. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The mill quieted, almost listening. Wade looked to the window. The faint gold on the horizon sharpened. Morning was close enough to taste, yet the widow's mill had one more move to play. He could feel it coiling in the dark, waiting to strike before the sun stripped away its claim. The eastern sky wore a blade of gold now, thin but sharp. Wade's pulse quickened. Dawn was coming. Yet the mill shook like it meant to hold him in darkness a little longer. Rafters rattled, dust poured from the beams, and the chalk circle flickered pale as a dying ember. Then came the sound of boots. Not dragging, not marching measured, purposeful. They crossed the floor inside the circle. That was impossible. The line had not broken. But Wade heard them plain. Wade Corbett. The name cracked the silence like a whip. The air grew heavy, pressing against his chest. From the center of the chalk rose a figure, tall, shoulders squared beneath a wide-brim hat. Its face was a shadow, shifting, never fixed. In its hand hung the rope from the loft, uncoiled now, strands rasping across the boards with each step. Wade raised his revolver, though he knew bullets had no meaning here. Still, the weight steadied his arm. "You stole from the spring," the figure said, its voice braided from a dozen tones, an outlaw's sneer, a woman's whisper, a dying man's curse. "You crossed the chalk. The law does not forget." "I've paid," Wade shot back. His throat ached, but his voice held. "I kept the watch. I stayed inside the line." The figure tilted its head, shadows stretching long. "Balance is not kept by waiting. Balance is kept by giving." The rope dragged closer. The chalk flared, desperate, then dimmed. Wade's boots pressed against the loft floor. Sweat stung his eyes. "What more do you want?" His voice cracked. The figure leaned in, shadow curling toward him like smoke from a dying fire. "Your name. Speak it." Every muscle in Wade's body tightened. Mara's words hammered in his skull. "Do not speak your full name." Silence fell, waiting, daring. His lips parted, thirst and fear clawing for release. Instead, Wade whispered the only words that had kept him anchored all night. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The figure recoiled. The rope fell slack, unraveling into dust. The chalk line blazed once, bright as lightning, then steadied. The mill roared, shaking as if it meant to tear itself apart. The vanes outside spun madly in a wind that did not exist. Wade gripped the beam, teeth clenched, waiting for the end or the beginning. Through the window, the horizon split wide. Gold spilled across the desert, pouring light into the cracks where the shadows tried to hide. The figure vanished, but the air still hummed with a promise. Debts unpaid do not disappear. The first blaze of dawn tore through the mill's broken window, gold flooding across the chalk ring. Shadows hissed, recoiling into cracks, vanishing where the light touched. The vanes groaned once, then stilled, as though the building itself had given up its long argument with the night. Wade slumped against the beam, revolver slipping from his hand. His throat burned, his body ached, but he was alive. The chalk line lay unbroken, pale as bone. He had endured. Slowly, carefully, he stepped out of the circle. The boards held, quiet now. He pushed open the door, and for the first time in hours the hinge sighed with nothing hiding behind it. Outside, his horse stood waiting, sides lathered but breathing. Wade let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a prayer. On the ridge beyond the gully, a rider watched. Mara Lark, still as stone in the morning light. When Wade's boots touched dust, she tipped her hat in silent acknowledgement. She did not ride down, did not call out, only turned her horse and vanished along the ridge, leaving him with the weight of what he had carried through the night. Wade mounted, though every muscle protested. He looked once at the mill. In daylight it was just timber and rust, leaning and broken. But he knew better. Widow's Mill was a ledger, and his name was written in its pages now. As the sun rose higher, the prairie seemed almost gentle again, yet the wind carried whispers, faint and sharp, like words carved into dust. No man drinks after the raven circles. No man crosses the chalk at twilight. The ancient law remembers. Wade tightened his reins and rode on, carrying silence with him, the kind that lives longer than songs.